I recently made a video about 3 tips for working with concrete, and they were some pretty good ideas, and I think that there's more on the table here. So let's talk about 3 more tips about working with concrete. And first of all, just let me say that I think concrete is a fantastic hobby, something that everybody should take up, or a lot of people should take up, because it's a super versatile medium. It's in fact the most versatile construction medium on the planet. More stuff is made out of concrete than any other construction material on the planet. And concrete is second most utilized substance on the planet other than just water. Water is the only thing that we use more than concrete. So yeah, you could say there's a host of applications that you could use it for. And that's why I say that it's great to get into, because it's also something that's really affordable. You can do a lot of stuff with it. You can make a lot of mistakes. You can do a lot of experiments and trial and errors, and it doesn't really cost you very much at all. It's not really a big deal. So certainly something that everybody that is looking for a hobby should consider, especially if you have a house or you like to do maintenance around the home. Learning some basic concrete fundamentals can go a long way towards increasing the scope, size, and type of projects that you're able to take on yourself. So 3 more things that I want you to know about working with concrete. The first thing, you know how concrete workers are typically out there at 5 a.m. making a huge racket while you're trying to sleep, and you're like, the heck are these guys doing out there? We're starting up their gas-powered concrete mixers at 5 or 6 in the morning. Well, they're out there beating the sun, because it's actually really, really important. In the previous video, I talked a little bit about hydration of the concrete and how the amount of water that you add to your concrete mix is critically important to the finished strength of your concrete. Well, if you start your concrete project, let's gonna say we're pouring a concrete slab today, let's say. If you start that project at noon during the heat of the midday sun, you might very well encounter some hydration issues, because you're going to have a lot of water evaporating off from just the heat blazing down on it. And concrete itself generates heat as part of this chemical process of actuating. And so it's being blasted with heat from the sun, and it's generating its own heat. So it's like a convection oven. And then you've got wind blowing on it, evaporating the water. And that water component that was critically important, now we've lost 30% of that water. The concrete is compromised as a result. It'll still be hard, it'll still, be concrete, but you might have a lot more, hairline cracking, something like that. There could be actually a number of different problems that it could introduce, a lot of them related to cracking. That's why you want to start your concrete project early in the morning. You want to keep your concrete out of the blazing sun. Maybe you're in a situation where you can't start early enough, or it's just not something that you can, beat the sun on. Well, then set up shelters or sunshades or something like this to aid the concrete, because having that direct sunlight on your concrete really eats up a lot of that moisture that the concrete needs for the actuating process. And again, really there's just so much heat from the sun on it. And that's why those concrete workers are all out there so early. Not to mention concrete's really hard work as well, and you don't want to be doing it under the midday sun. Get it out of the way first thing in the morning when it's still nice and cool. That's a really good tip. So something else that I would want you to know. When you pour concrete, we're talking about this moisture thing and how important it is. What are you pouring this concrete on? Picture something in your mind. We're pouring a concrete pad, let's say. Well, let's say that concrete pad is over top of sand or something like that. If I were to pour my wet concrete right on top of this dry sand, what do you think happens? Well, that sand just rips the moisture right out of the concrete, just leaches it out like a sponge, just sucks all that extra moisture out of the concrete. And again, we've compromised the concrete, because we've compromised the amount of moisture that's retained in the concrete. So the way that you resolve this problem is by something called SSD conditions, saturated surface dry conditions. Those are the conditions you need when you're pouring concrete. And it doesn't really matter what you're pouring your concrete over. I mentioned sand, but maybe it's gravel, or maybe it's an old concrete pad, or maybe something else, but it doesn't matter what you're pouring the concrete over, because you need to make SSD conditions, saturated surface dry. That means that you have soaked it. You soaked that thing until it wouldn't absorb any more water, and then you stopped. And that's what surface dry means. It means that we didn't just keep going and it's like pooling water 3 inches deep, should be good to go, right? That's not SSD, because now we're pooling water and we'd be adding too much water. We're worried before about taking too much away. In that case, we'd be worried about adding too much. So that's what SSD means. Whatever you're doing or whatever you're pouring your concrete on, you want to water it maybe even a couple of times to really get that area nice and saturated, such that when I put my concrete on there, which is the exact slump with the exact amount of moisture that I intended it to have, it gets to retain that and the environmental conditions don't steal that away. That's very important. So talking about this concrete that we've poured, the third tip I want you to know today is that concrete cures best when it retains moisture. I get a lot of phone calls the next day after pouring concrete, and a lot of times people sound pretty upset, pretty hysterical. They spent a lot of money for some nice new concrete and it rained overnight. Wouldn't you know it? Terrible luck. And they call me, they're super concerned about their concrete. It poured last night, is a ruin, just lay it on me. How bad is it, Steve? And it's great, it's fantastic. Your concrete is better now as a result, because what it comes down to is you want to protect the concrete from water and rain and things like that until it's hard. Once the concrete is hard and the water itself physically isn't going to cause any imperfections in the finish that you've put on it, adding extra moisture actually helps you, because the concrete will become thirsty. It uses up all the water that was available to it in the actuating process. Now it's hard, but it's not cured. It takes a month, 30 days for concrete to cure. And during that time, it's going to be dry. And if you were to go out and do something called wet curing, which is kind of what the rain did that first night, is it just wet the concrete? Well, go out the next day and re-wet it again. And when you first spray it with the hose, you'll hear it. It sounds like a bowl of Rice Krispies snap crackling away. It's so dry, it's so thirsty, it wants that moisture, and it's good for it. So something to take away here is that once your concrete is set, the addition of water for the next, let's say 30 days, but really the first 3 to 7 days, that's the real important time. Keep that concrete wet, keep it saturated with water, don't let it dry out. One thing I should mention is concrete is a very deep technical world, and I'm just using a very broad term, concrete, but we could be talking about a million different things in terms of this concrete, and not every concrete is the same. And what I'm getting at here is wet curing works on almost all concrete projects, but not all of them. So you can't take this information and just apply it to every concrete project you've ever heard of. Oh, I tried wet curing like you say and I messed it up. You shouldn't do that, because again, concrete is a very deep technical world, and I just want you to understand that wet curing is something that does help facilitate a stronger, better cure for concrete under most conditions. Your pool deck, a new driveway, the sidewalk out front of your home, all of these things are probably going to benefit by wet curing. A concrete countertop that you specially had made, and it's made with some pretty, advanced bonding agents and polymers and things like that, I probably wouldn't go and wet cure that concrete without the person who made it telling me, no, wet curing is good for this, because there could be admixtures that have been used in this concrete that do not require or even specifically say to avoid wet curing. For the most part, wet curing is good for concrete, and once your concrete's hard, if it gets wet, it's not a problem at all. So these are the 3 tips that I want you to take away today, with 3 more tips for how to work with concrete. If you found this information helpful, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can check out my website, swimmingpoolsteve.com.